Speaking of paste, I made an assortment of nut butters because I wanted to kind of show you the world outside of peanut butter. So I have a couple options here. This is an almond butter that I used. I made it with honey and orange zest. This is a pistachio butter, which I just roasted the pistachios and ground them with a little bit of salt. And then this is a pecan butter, and I used maple syrup and what else did I use in that? Maple syrup, salt, and cinnamon. And I have some crackers here. So if you guys would like to pass them around and try them, there is a recipe in your packet. I think it's the last page of your packet, but I wanted to kind of open your eyes to different ways to use nuts. So the general concept of any kind of nut butter is to toast them for about 10 minutes at 325. And then while they're still hot, while the oils have still kind of released, you want to start blending them. So you can put it in a blender, but I've had better use with a food processor. Or if you wanted to do your mortar and pestle, if you really wanted to work out, you could. And for about 10 minutes, just let it run, and it'll get really kind of grainy, and they'll all start breaking apart, and you'll think it'll never come together, and then it'll come together. So it just takes a while. And I did do these. I burnt out my machine because I did these back to back. But if you're doing them at home, yeah, so if you guys want to try it, try some crackers. I also made some seed crackers, and there's a recipe for this also. These are 5 different seeds. These are more of a savory cracker, and this is more neutral. So I wanted you to be able to taste it with a neutral cracker. This is an almond cracker. It uses rice flour, so it's gluten-free. This is also gluten-free and vegan. And the seeds in here are flax seeds, chia seeds, sesame seeds, pumpkin seeds, these guys, the pepitas, and sunflower seeds with the holes removed, so with the outside part removed. And the only other 2 ingredients in here are water and salt. And what makes these like enough to be crispy, they are crispy, is, have you ever used chia seeds to eat, or have you ever gotten them wet and you know how they get that like slimy feeling, gelatin? It's not gelatin, but it's similar to it. It's considered a mucilaginous seed. And flax seeds are the exact same way. In fact, we have crackers downstairs called flackers, which are just flax seeds and water and salt. And it's the exact same idea. So you just mix it all together with the water, let the chia seeds kind of bloom, and then put them on a sheet tray with a parchment paper, sprinkle them with salt, and bake them at around 300 degrees for 25 minutes, and they become really kind of crunchy and nice. So they have an earthy flavor to them. Like, you can kind of taste the health, I like to say. But I think it's a really fun way. There's no sugar in it. They're completely gluten-free, grain-free, and they have a ton of fiber, a ton of protein. And I think it's just kind of a fun thing to put on a cheese plate. I know you said you don't eat grains anymore, and that's one thing I always kind of miss on a cheese plate, is having something to put the cheese on. So, yeah.
They're amazing.
Thanks. Yeah. So try them with the nut butters and see. This is the, like, again, this is the pecan. This has a little bit of maple syrup in it. This has a little bit of honey. This is the almond. And then that is just straight up pistachio. Plain pistachio. You guys have questions about making nut butters or baking? I know we've talked a little bit about baking with nut flours. And have you gotten a chance to work with your coconut flour yet?
No.
Coconut's actually the largest seed also. Really? Not considered a nut, it's a seed. But, yeah.
How is coconut flour different for baking than almond flour? What do you find?
So coconut flour is very absorbent. And almond flour will not absorb anything. Almond flour is very high in fat. Coconut is not as high in fat. So if you're using it in a pancake, you would use like about a quarter of the flour, of the coconut flour, than you would almond flour. If you're using it as a breading, I would mix it with like maybe half coconut flour and half almond flour. A lot of it also doesn't color as much as almond flour does. So if you were frying something, it would be advantageous to mix it with some coconut flour so that your almond flour doesn't burn right away, because that is really heat sensitive. And yes, coconut will toast, but it toasts at a much higher temperature. And when you are using coconut flour, you just have to, if you're substituting coconut flour for almond flour or regular old white flour, you're going to have to change how much is in your moisture of your recipe. So if you've made the recipe with white flour and you know it's supposed to look a certain way, and you make it with the coconut flour and it's like a brick, then you'll know maybe you need to add another egg, or maybe you need to add a little bit more water to it to kind of thin it out. Because I've made some, I usually use coconut flour in my brownies because I like, to me it makes them a little cakier, it's not as dense. But in the sugar-free brownie cheesecake downstairs, we use the almond flour because we want it to be dense because it's a crust. So we bake the brownie in the crust, and then we put the sugar-free cheesecake on top. What do you guys think of the nut butters?
It's delicious.
Yeah.
This one's really good.
And the
I'm always-
pistachio one, like, I don't know, it's good.
It's interesting. I like adding citrus zest to those, to the pistachio, like a lemon zest or a maybe like an orange zest. But I wanted to kind of give you, because we don't often see pistachio butter around. You'll see almond butter, and sometimes you'll see pecan butter. But you'll also see the difference here in the fat content. So this, you can see the shine of the oil. And the oil is coming out here, but it's a much less fatty nut on the pecan butter. So, but these are super fatty. So it's something where I usually, when I make it, I'll pop it in the fridge, and then like 10 minutes before I need it, I'll take it out if I want it to be spreadable, or just keep it out at room temperature and then stir it up before you need it. And then, oh, so speaking of almond flour, I made, have you ever had pinoli cookies, the pine nut cookies? So these are completely gluten-free, but this uses almond flour and almond paste. There is a little bit of sugar in there, and an egg white, and you mix it all together, lemon zest. And
I tried making them at Christmas, and they were terrible, so I threw them out.
what happened to them?
They were hard as a rock.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know what they should look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is an example of using almonds in place of a flour. So you could use regular flour, but they also provided, they also said you can use almond flour if you want. It's a 1-to-1 sub. So for this, it's only adding texture. It's not adding, like you couldn't sub out just almond flour if you were making bread, because you need that rise, you need the protein. But this doesn't need the protein. It just needs the fat. It needs the bulk, and it has a similar bulk. So. And
Yeah, it's really good.
thanks. And then
Has it got anise or something?
there's orange or lemon zest in there. Maybe that's what you're tasting. But no, there's no anise, but that would be really good in there actually if you ground that up too. And the last three things I have are kind of more, well, that's sweet, but also these are just kind of sweet things. I like to, well, Nader can tell you about these when he's done eating, but I'll tell you about these too. Kind of my favorite way to elevate nuts for like a cheese platter, or if you're, you know, you want them, we use these as bar nuts at the place I used to work, but we would do it with a mixed nut. Or every Christmas I make these and I use peanuts, but these are rosemary crusted nuts. So you take just sugar and water, you cook it down to thread stage, and then you put in your toasted nuts and stir it, and when you agitate it, that sugar starts to crystallize and it'll cover it. So as soon as it starts to crystallize, you throw on salt and rosemary, and they become this nice kind of savory sweet nut. And then if you were to do this, but take it one step further, you would end up with these. So I used hazelnuts. They wouldn't magically turn into hazelnuts. You can do this with any nut, but I love doing it with peanuts, but peanuts are technically a legume, so I wanted to do a seed today, not a seed, a nut. But the hazelnuts, so when you crystallize them, I didn't put the rosemary in this time, I just did plain sugar. And then you keep cooking it, that sugar will start to caramelize. And right when it's done caramelizing, I hit it with some butter, a little bit of salt, and some cinnamon. And the butter is just basically to keep it from all sticking together. You put it out on a sheet pan. When it starts to cool off, you can kind of like do this to it to make them all separate. And then you end up with candied hazelnuts, candied cinnamon hazelnuts. And then Nader has his dessert.
I already talked about it, but since you were not here, I'll talk. It's okay. It's sesame and honey. Just you heat up the honey just for a little bit. It's about 2 minutes. And you throw the sesame in, cup to a cup, and mix them really good. Put them on a sheet, and let them just cool off, dry, and just cut them. And they taste wonderful. Speaking of,
do it with like
Taste them.
tortillas and sunflower seeds?
you could
It
do,
wouldn't be traditional.
you could do it with whatever, but this is like something we grew up on. And when we saw sesame, we're like, let's do the sesame sticks, and that's what we came up with. Because I really love these. We grew up on them, and this is really cool.
Yeah.
And she didn't put a lot of honey. Usually there's more, but
I think it's just the right amount of sweet.
yeah,
It's nice.
yeah. And your cookies are wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
And you used what flour? Was it almond?
Almond flour, almond paste, which is just ground almonds with sugar, lemon zest, egg white, and then roll them in pine nuts. Yeah. That's good. Questions, comments, ideas? Anything.
Well, I'm chewing them.
No, I know. It's,
I found my grandmother's cookbook that was handwritten to her when for her 16th birthday in Yugoslavia.
Oh wow!
And it was in Slovak, and I had to try to translate it, but it was very hard because it was actually Slovak, Serbian, Russian,
oh, wow.
like 5 languages mixed in there. Pidgin Slovak maybe. But there were a lot of nut cake recipes. And it turns out her friend had been a personal pastry chef for some wealthy family in Novi Sad. And so they were, I think, from Café Gerbeau in Hungary, which is where everyone used to get trained in the 1800s for pastry. And so I have all these old recipes.
Wow.
That my favorite is a walnut cake. No flour, just all walnuts and eggs. Very little sugar. And it is the
You've
best.
made it.
Yeah, I've made it several times. It's a family, that one in particular.
Yeah.
My family made it. And another one was a hazelnut cake.
Yeah, that's good too.
Yeah.
I use
But it
that.
got me thinking about what baking really there was 100 or 150 years ago. I bet there was a lot more.
There was a whole lot more. We were talking with my daughter. They're doing a play at school for the gladiator and the weddings, and literally everything that they did was nuts baking for the bride. They're making the cake and all stuff. Anything to do with nuts. In the Middle East, there's a lot of different nuts, and there's a lot of trees. I grew up in there, and literally every day you're having some kind of nuts. Depends on the season. You will have nuts every day. Today I found out I was searching pistachios, so I could talk about pistachio. It takes literally 20 years to pick up a tree of pistachio from the day that they grow it. And that's why it's so expensive, because it takes a long, long time. And most of the stuff that she talked about, I mean, it's every day. It's in our food. It's in our lunch. It's in our dinner. Here it's mostly in our breakfast. It's peanut butter. So it's stuff like that. And when you look into it and you start want to eat, when you get to my age, you'll understand. You like start eating healthy and you start figuring out. And my wife liked to search a lot of things, and this is what we really go through. My 9 years old, she will go through a pound of this every day.
Oh my gosh.
Literally. If there is no dates in the house, she would not go to school in the morning till she have her dates with her. And when she come home, I'm hungry. The first thing she go to the pantry and she grab the dates. Like, could you wait for dinner? No, she's gonna have her dates. We raised them really from the beginning, both of them, dates and honey. We started the honey, the part of the honey for the allergy to avoid having allergy, because the more not organic, natural and local honey that you buy from the farms, local, you avoid a lot of the allergy. And the dates, it's the protein and everything is in it. It's just to keep them healthy. And they love it to death, so they cannot starve.
One of my new favorite recipes I learned a few years ago is Fesenjan, the Iranian dish that's walnut sauce, where you bake the chicken in the walnut sauce. Cool. And that's got pomegranate molasses. And it's a sweet and sour.
Exactly. The pomegranate, the molasses part of it, it's really, really good.